Thanks for joining CBC Rewind, where we sit down with Pastor Gary as he dives deeper into his sermon.
All right, CBC, thank you for tuning in today. Today we've got Pastor Gary. How are you today?
I'm the top of the world, brother.
All
top
right.
of the world.
So today we're going to be discussing last week's sermon entitled Fan into Flame.
There you go.
And so we'll just jump right into the questions. So you mentioned in your sermon that 1% of the Gen Z population has a biblical view. And so first I just what do you think the root of that problem is?
All right, well, let's define that. This is George Barna, who, as you know, is a credible pollster, okay? 1% of Generation Z, the current generation coming up, does not have a Christian worldview, all right? What that means is their actions don't match up with what that generation says they believe. So there's no practice of a faith. If they say there's a faith, but there's no practice of it, it's sort of discounted. So 1%. So how do you get to 1%? How do you get such a miserable low number of people looking at the world through the eyes of Christ, the life of Christ, ministry of Christ? Well, easy. You give them parents and grandparents that don't do that either, and you end up with a generational void of an awareness of, an allegiance to, and a dependence and recognition of who Christ is, the hope of glory. And that's where we're at.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of adding on to that, what could older generations do to work with the Gen Z generation to increase that percentage?
Well, there's some things that Christian believers can do. And there are some things that Christian believers need to refrain from doing. Works both ways. Mm-hmm. What can we do? Take up and carry the evangelistic mantle that God has for us. Fan into flame a zeal and passion to see the lost come to Christ. And increase our resources available to children's ministry, youth ministry. Make children and youth ministry a focal point of the church. These are all positive, proactive opportunities to reach a generation. Has to happen. Basically has to happen in every generation, but because it hasn't adequately, it's now even more important. All right, these are all things. Pastors have to think more about children and youth ministry than ever and resource it, budget for it. So what steps are we making as a church? Well, we're starting a music and arts academy to go into the community and reach people who otherwise are unchurched. We're adding ministry to our children's offerings, like a week-long camp next year, where we hope to have eventually hundreds of kids coming to go away at camp. We're tweaking and resourcing and strategically planning along the lines of the music involved in teen ministry, worship band. We're looking at a strategic plan to open a counseling center for teens on the plateau, teens and families. So all of this has to be continually a priority. Now, that's all what we can do, and there's more. But what should we not be doing? I don't know the number, but I know it's big. Hundreds of thousands, maybe close to 1 million. I don't know how many teenagers there are in this country. But we can ill afford to go through another election and the Christian right be seen by young people as full of hypocrisy. It is severing the ties that may have existed between young people and the church. We have to vote our values. We have to promote our values, but we cannot condone things that aren't in sync with our values and end up looking like hypocrites in the eyes of the future of the Church of Jesus Christ. Somebody better wake up and figure this out, or we're going to, every 4 years, deplete the potential that the church has to move forward. Mm-hmm. Basically, bottom line, period, exclamation point. Doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you can't deny the results. We can't, on one hand, be negative towards one group of people and condone the sins of another. And the double standard is costing us a huge amount of credibility in the eyes of younger generations who actually want authenticity and genuineness of all things. Imagine that. There's reality for you. So that's one thing we can stop doing or do differently. You know, we need to be politically engaged, politically involved, voting our values, promoting our values, but do it in such a way that doesn't alienate the future of the church. There you go.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that kind of leads into this next question. You mentioned the quote, "Gratitude is the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others." And then later on you stated, "It is becoming increasingly difficult to be grateful for what you have when what you have is so much." And so because of this lack of faith in newer generations, how do we go about teaching gratitude to non-believers, whether it be towards God or just in general?
Sure. All right. Well, I'm sharing at that point. I'm sharing an anecdotal observation. Okay. I think the principle I used was: let's say you live in Miami and you see the beach every day. It loses its luster after a while, just like the mountains lose their luster. We become familiar with stuff. We have ministries across the nation in our culture that are prosperity gospel. We like to accumulate things. We're consumers, right? We are a people, as I say often, most richly blessed, myself included. We are the richest people in the world. And I'm talking about everyone in this country. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, an occasional drop in week to 10 days in a third world country wakens us up sometimes to the fact, you've experienced this. And it's healthy. It's okay. I understand it. That, man, we do have a lot to be grateful for. So I think part of being more grateful for what we have is to be around those who are without, number one. Number two, also discern that if you don't work, you don't eat. So sometimes people don't have because they're slothful. Okay, so there's a discernment there. We have an entitlement mentality in our culture among a younger generation. Again, here we're back to this, where we feel entitled to things. Mm-hmm. We deserve certain things. Someone beyond us should provide these things for me, which is not biblical. Okay, that's more socialism than it is capitalism, and it's certainly not biblical. So there's a tension between those things. But here I would say to those who are, you often hear you have the haves and the have-nots. Well, don't let what you have own you. Be biblical in your generosity and giving, and realize, quite frankly, as hard as you've worked and as much as a good steward as you've been in your life, at the end of the day, we don't really deserve anything. We can be more grateful when we realize we really don't deserve much in light of where we are as fallen people, but redeemed by Christ. So gratitude is huge, man. We have to work at that. We have to work at worshiping God for how He's blessed us. We have to acknowledge He as the source, not us, of what it is we have, and to be a blessing where we feel by the Spirit of God we need to be a blessing. So, yeah, when gratitude goes, then we become fat and happy, self-sufficient, less dependent upon God. Not cool. Mm-hmm. Not cool at all.
All right. So you mentioned cancel culture in regard to respecting your elders, and I just wanted to dive in a little bit on that. Respecting your elders is something that's almost non-existent outside of a family dynamic, in my opinion, at this point. And so kind of yet again, how do we teach being grateful and respectful to potential non-believers? And also, what is the biblical view on cancel culture?
Okay. I said this at one part of the sermon. I didn't plan on saying anything about it. It's just a total in the moment thing, which is okay, especially if it's accurate. My observation was in talking about the lack of a biblical worldview in Generation Z that there are ways of viewing the world that I think are more biblical that almost are becoming extinct. I mentioned chivalry, I think. Mm-hmm. Chivalry started to shrivel up years ago. I don't even know if ladies today appreciate that, or is it communicated as a sign of weakness? I don't know. I think it's intended to be respectful and caring. So I think that's one thing. The other is authority. There's been, I said, respect your elders. I'm not even sure that's going on in the home in America. So I do differ with you on that. I think that we have, unlike cultures in the Far East, or even in Europe and in Italy, why did the COVID virus spread so fast in certain parts of the world? I think high-density housing and multi-generational, multiple generations living in the same home. The elderly are taken care of in other cultures more than they are here, okay? So I think it starts with the elderly, with grandma and grandpa. We have left a healthy respect for our elders there, and I think it's permeated different areas of parents. The divorce rate is diluted that. We have parents that are the blended family has cost us some credibility and authority. Mm-hmm. The police, we have an issue with police. We have an issue with government. We have an eroding trustworthiness in our culture that is costing us a respect for authority and for one another, okay? These are observations. So what do we do about it? The church has a great opportunity, and when I say church, I mean not just CBC. The way we live, if we are to live with integrity, our yes is yes, our no is no. If I was speaking with about 35 men on Tuesday morning. I said, listen, guys, you have to be able to call one another out on issues and confront one another. Like iron does need to sharpen iron. I said, you come in here and we get into the word, but if you fail, like if you let a guy just gossip behind someone's back and you just take it in and listen to it and never call him on it, then we're diluting the authority of God and the word and your relationship with the other guy, right? Mm-hmm. We have to have that kind of integrity. So what happens is we don't confront one another like we should. And this is where immaturity comes out. People won't like something that's said from the pulpit, so they leave the church. That's immature. That is grossly immature. Pouting, whining, never confronting, never asking, never looking at it from a different point of view, never challenging one another. If the church doesn't challenge one another, doesn't respect one another, then we are part of the world. We have conformed to the pattern of this world, which is what? Cancel culture. You're canceled. You're done. I'm done with you, done with you. Why? Because you challenge me, you make me feel uncomfortable, or you want to actually be honest. There you go. We just run from one another, and nothing ever gets resolved. Mm-hmm. And you end up with a nation with 49.9% of the people on one side of the coin and 49.9% on the other side. And then there you have the middle. Yeah.
All right. So last thing.
So listen, do you have a problem with me? Let's talk about it right now.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
all right. So the last thing I have for you is, what do we have to look forward to for this upcoming Sunday?
Oh, wow. This is going to be a different message. It's called Hot Coals. Mm-hmm. So we're going to look at hot coals as you read them in Isaiah 6. The angel puts a hot coal on the lips of the figure there. You'll see that. We're going to talk about heaping hot coals on your neighbor. Okay, we're going to flesh that out. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to talk about the hot coals when Peter betrayed Christ and how Christ restored him at a hot coal fire. We've talked about that before, but we're going to get a little more in depth. Mm-hmm. So get ready for some hot coals. You ever barbecue?
I have. Yeah.
All right, well, this is it, man. This is your sermon. There's going to be a lot of hot coals.
Yeah.
Gray. We're getting gray.
All right.
Gray coals.
Well, thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next week for another CBC Rewind.
Amen.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to email Gary your questions at askgary@cbchighlands.com.